listen to my heart, I can hear you whisper, asking me lovingly to come and follow you. Here I am. Did I hear you call my name?
Good morning. Welcome to Dare to Love Show. My name is Sister Lavina Francis Pamet. I'm a Franciscan Sister of the Sacred Heart. And my co-host, good morning, Father Adam.
Good morning, Sister Lavina. Good to be with you. I'm Father Adam McDonald, a missionary priest of the Society of the Divine Word.
Now, for this February show, we will be featuring a special guest who is also a brand new author. But at the same time, we are celebrating because on the first and second, it's actually February 2nd, that we will be celebrating the World Day of Prayer for Consecrated Life. And this weekend, for the weekend masses, beginning on Saturday and then, of course, on Sunday, the masses will be celebrating that World Day of Prayer for Consecrated Life. So we welcome everyone who is watching right now. And for the discernment and those discerners, when you are needing some time to think and perhaps what are the guides or any inspiration, modeling, or any thoughts of how do you make decisions? When you are making decision between good and bad, it's obvious. But what about when you have two or more things to decide upon that are all good? Sometimes that is very hard to do, and hopefully on this show, we will be able to put some inspiration from the Holy Spirit today. And also, we will be expecting this month the start of the Lenten season. On February 18, we will have Ash Wednesday, and so we also try to prepare for that mode of prayer and meditation, and probably, in a way, as we have welcomed 2026, hope for some conversion or a change in life and also concern for others. So welcome, Father Adam. Thank you for being able to grab another one of your friends as our guest today.
Indeed.
So I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you, Sister Lavina, and I want to add my words of welcome and good morning to everyone and point out that in addition to celebrating World Day of Prayer for Consecrated Life and the start of the Lenten season, I love February because we also celebrate the heart, right? I always make hearts, right? Valentine's Day on February 14th, and you know, the founder of my religious congregation, the Society of the Divine Word, he prayed every day that the heart of Jesus would live in our hearts and in the hearts of all people. So that's what I think about on Valentine's Day, is trying to align my heart with that of Jesus. And today we have a special guest who I know is living his life in that vein of aligning his heart as a lay, a married man, a lay Catholic in the church, serving professionally, working for the Archdiocese, but also discerning his path of how he's answered God's call. So I'm very excited to introduce you and the world, Sister Lavina, to my good friend and colleague, Matt Kresich. Welcome to the show,
Welcome, Matt.
Thank you so much. Really honored to be here, and a great way to tee up our conversation and on the book, right? As I think we'll unpack a little bit over this time together, how discernment and ongoing discernment in our vocation really is an invitation of love. And you know, one of the phrases that really stuck with me from a fellow SVD is grace upon grace, right? That process of discernment is a continual, ongoing grace field. So it's not just about making that big decision, which is important,
Amen.
But that it's an ongoing path really that we walk in our entire life. So really looking forward to unpacking that a little bit with both of you.
Thank you, Matt, and welcome to the show. And I think Sister Lavina would agree. You just said it better than either of us could. I mean, what an introduction to the Dare to Love show, to have you talk right off the bat about how everything is about the call to love. And so if you notice, the title of our program today is The Path of Discernment, Hearing God's Call. Why is that the title? Because that is the title of the brand new book that our friend Matt has published, The Path of Discernment, Hearing God's Call. There you see it on the screen. And so we know you're all going to run out and get your copies. But before you do, indeed, let us unpack what this is all about. So before we do that, Matt, I've got some real long titles here for how you serve in the Archdiocese of Chicago. And I think if you could introduce yourself a little bit more in terms of like what is the context of the work and service you provide for the Archdiocese. So just tell us a little bit more about yourself, if you could.
Absolutely. So have been with the Archdiocese of Chicago for about the last year and a half, and it's been just a kind of grace-filled experience and a joy. So in my title, Director of Vicariate Renewal, which I always have to unpack a little bit.
Please.
So I work with the parishes in Vicariate 6, which is the southern portion here, kind of from South Loop down to the southern edge and southeast suburbs of the Archdiocese of Chicago. So I support the work of the 38 parishes, and particularly working closely with the pastors for areas of spiritual renewal, evangelization, and just general ministry support for them. And so it's a great blessing with that very diverse region in 6, but a real beauty to really walk with those pastors and connect them to the larger resources that we have here in the Archdiocese, and saying, how do we take each of our parishes and instill that missionary discipleship attitude, so that everyone in the parish sees it as their job to be an evangelist, to be a healing presence, and to lead others to Christ. And so it's been just an absolute joy in my time. And before that, I worked in parish youth and young adult ministry. So, a lot of this work for this book started in that role of working with young people and hearing their challenges of when it comes to discernment, and then finding the right choice, whatever that may be. But then realizing that it's a much wider challenge. It's not just something a high schooler makes when they're going into college. It's not something when someone's graduating college, am I picking the right profession? But that discernment is a graceful opportunity if we allow it, or it can really drive us nuts and be a detriment to our spiritual life if we don't do it in a healthy way.
For sure. Now, I hope this is not giving anything away that's too secret, but I have it on good authority that you mentioned having worked before in youth and young adult ministry. That was in the Diocese of Gary, Indiana. And we love our friends from Northwest Indiana. Whether the Bears go there or stay in Illinois, we still love you. And we know that you did that work so faithfully. So what a journey you've been on serving for the diocese. And I know you grew up and kind of came into the world in Northwest Indiana, and have the connection now in Chicago. And thank you for sharing with us a little bit about that. I'm connecting with the fact that not only do I live on the south side in Hyde Park, so I think I'm in your vicariate, right? St. Thomas the Apostle is right around the corner from my house. But also this idea that our founder, and Sister Lavina would appreciate this because we've talked about it so much, our founder of a missionary congregation talked about mission animation as being something very important for us. Now, when you think of animation, you might think of a Pixar film. Okay, that's fine too. But the Pixar films, they take pictures and bring them to life to tell a story. And so our founder wanted us to animate and evangelize the church to help her claim her rightful sense of being a missionary church, that our faith is given to us so that it may be shared, so that it may be communicated, and others may be invited into it. So it sounds like it really aligns with what you're talking about in terms of helping the parish have that sense of a call to mission, a call to faith.
Absolutely, and I started to use that term a lot more, animating, right? Because it's, Matt is not the expert, right? I'm not the person from the arch that's going to save your parish, right? Right? Christ is powerfully present in our parish communities, and sometimes, like all of us, we need a little help, right? We need a little bit of a spark to ignite what's already there, and so that's really where I see my role, is animating the skills and the talents of our pastors and our parish communities to help, again, aliven what's already there, but like all of us in ministry, right? Any of us who work in ministry, sometimes we need a little help with that spark.
Absolutely.
And so that's been just a great collaboration with the pastors, and a job that every morning I wake up and I'm excited to do.
For sure.
Just hearing that you're in Vicariate 6, working with the pastors there and the parishes, and you were in Gary, there's a lot of connections that are already identified, Father Adam.
Yeah.
Amen.
So first of all, whatever you say about Notre Dame, I have a special place because I love the campus. Also, our very good friend, Sister Connie Bach. I don't know if you've worked with her in the Diocese of Gary, but she's in the area. And about animation. We've had her several times.
Poor Handmaids of Jesus Christ from Donaldson,
If she lived in Chicago, she's probably another co-host here already. Yeah, she's
right.
always like welcome.
That's right.
She does a lot of good, especially
really
with her
does.
neighborhood,
For sure.
and also in trying to animate, vocation and vocation awareness, and I guess the heart for service and working with others in her area.
Yeah.
And then, so this is close to my heart. Bishop Kevin Birmingham would have been the bishop, Vicariate 6, before he passed. That's really what was close in his heart. Also, even longer than that, years ago, before Father Andrew Torma, remember Andy?
Yes.
He was at St. Michael's Parish.
That's right.
And in fact, I think, I don't know if you were there, but several of his friends in the Chicago area were there to celebrate him during his installation as pastor. But then he got moved on to Philly. That's the way with religious. Sometimes you get moved around. But that was also a special place because of that. So, it's such a grace. As you
Amazing
said, grace
connections.
upon
Yeah.
grace.
Yeah. And to think about using the word animation, as you just said, Sister Lavina, as we prepare to start the Lenten season, right? Isn't Lent all about animating and kind of enkindling within us once again that spark of attraction toward the things of the Lord? In whatever ways we may have been attracted to other things, how do we sort of reclaim that space and place for God in our lives? And so we'll hear the word animation, we'll hear the word evangelization most likely throughout this program, but I'd like to divulge in full transparency that I first came to know our guest, Matt Kresich, back in 2019. Think of where you were in 2019. I was at a place called the Catholic Theological Union in Hyde Park, taking part as a mentor and a small group leader, if you will, for a program that was run out of CTU at that time through the Bernardine Center of the Catholic Theological Union. It was called Catholics on Call. And my friend Matt happened to be one of the participants that year. So see, you go from being a participant and a small group leader, and then you develop a friendship and a bond of faith. And so just kind of going back to how we first got to know each other in that program, I'm curious to know kind of like, where were you at in your journey at that point? And kind of like, I have a feeling that was part of the engine that drove you into where you've been going in your life in recent years. I could be wrong about that, but kind of just thinking back in time, what drew you to kind of participate in that? And then what was its impact in your life looking forward?
Exactly. So I do dedicate a chunk of the book to this because it was really a fundamental moment in my understanding of vocation. And so the very brief context and really brief backstory, I studied engineering in college, really thought the priesthood was kind of where God was calling me and felt like this is where God's calling me. Then met someone and felt this is really where God's calling me. And then all of that kind of fell apart and then ended up leaving my engineering job 3 days before I was supposed to start, like before my start day. I remember sending the email, and I very vividly remember where I was and hit the send button saying, sorry, I'm not going to take this job because I was offered to work at a parish in youth and young adult ministry. And so I was going down all these different paths that felt like dead ends where for a while I felt like this is exactly what God wants. There's peace with this. And then the guilt of like switching and like, am I disappointing God? So I'm grappling with all this. And I, again, take this job in parish ministry. And the parish I was working at was run by Franciscan friars. And so they said, Matt, they're connected to the Catholic Theological Union because that's where they studied and also where the Pope studied. So we got to plug that.
Too.
Yeah. And so they sent me to Catholics on Call. And I joke in the book that it was kind of like this reverse discernment. I've already made this decision to work in ministry, right? I've already made these major life decisions, but going on this kind of discernment retreat. And I think it's a good metaphor, especially for people who aren't thinking religious life or the priesthood. For a lot of jobs, you can't go on a silent retreat, like you get a job offer and maybe you have like a week to think about it, right? And so we do a lot of, we should do as much preloading so we know ourselves beforehand, but there is a lot of reverse discernment in our life of, wow, how is God still working? How did I process that decision? And so that's what was happening on this retreat. And I remember I was happy with my job. I was only at it for a couple months at this point. But I had a lot of anger with God of like, God, why did you lead me down these pathways? Why do we waste time? Could we not just skip? Like, why couldn't I just go to working in this parish life? Why did I accept these jobs, feel called down this path? And so there's a lot of anger with God, honestly. And I mentioned this specifically in the book, but there was a moment with you, Father Adam, and maybe if you remember this or not, but there was a like a social going on in the evening, and we were just sitting to the side. And there was like music, and I think people were even dancing, and we were the two of us were just sitting to the side. And he said, "Man, tell me about your story." And I kind of walked you through that in more detail, walked down that path. And you didn't give any sage advice. You didn't say, "Wow, man, you made the right choice." You just listened. And that like clicked for me. Like that was the first time I had sat down and told my story in detail to someone, right? I maybe prayed over it, I angrily expressed it to God, but there was never a time that I just sat back in totality and kind of looked at my journey and shared that with another person. And again, I draw it out in the book, but it really helped me to put in context, those weren't dead ends. Those were all part of the journey. And selfishly, those different paths were helping other people in their journeys, right? Even though it wasn't maybe the end result I wanted, or wasn't like a grand ending that I wanted on a dead end path, which is not really true. But it really helped someone in their journey, in their vocational journey, right? And so I talk about the importance of telling your story for any of yours. Like if I don't know where God is calling me, it helps look where God has been with me in the past.
So just listening to you, it's beautiful, because this is how, and maybe it might be different. It could be a circuitous route for some that I didn't mean to like start laughing when you said I was angry at God. How can you laugh at someone saying you're angry at God? But the thing is, what it is it touches upon something that's familiar, can be frustrating. Why, God, why can't you be logistical about this journey, right? And then you mentioned about the reverse discernment, which is like looking back. Well, you wouldn't know what's in the future, which is so frustrating, because who wouldn't want clarity? But then the clarity comes from looking back. And sometimes looking back can mean that it may not even be about you. It could be somebody else. This time, though, in your story, it seems like it was about you at this point, and then it goes beyond, right? It kind of okay, being a woman, the natural thing is to give birth. But why can't male also figures, you also give birth? Hello, this is your baby right now, right?
Wow.
Because, and that's what it is the incarnation of what God has for us, the surprises that come. That is part of your generativity, is to give birth to what God has had all along in that plan. But I think also the accompaniment that's also important in discernment is, well, you said the telling of your story. For the first time, you told your story. And you may not have used the word, but to me, it's like the companion is not to tell you or even just affirm. It's to mirror what you already know inside you. So I think respecting the fact that we all have the Holy Spirit within us, the seeds of the discernment is already within us, and that seed of wisdom can really be helped by having a trusted companion who can then mirror that back to you.
Exactly, and that's something that I also dive into, the idea, because especially in our current times, there are so many noises and voices out there, and so having those trusted voices, right? I never, like growing up in a churchy world, I always had, especially nuns around saying, "Man, you gotta become a priest, right? I never thought ministry was like really my calling. I thought it was engineering. But then there was a moment in studying. I went to college with my best friend, like, we've known each other so long, I don't even know like when we met, so shout out to Scott. But there was a moment in college when my friend Scott, in the midst of all of our late night studying, said, "Matt, why are you doing this? Like, this isn't your calling, right?" And I didn't want to say it to him and to his face, because like that's not how our relationship worked. Like, "Scott, you're so right. Like we're like brothers in a sense, right?" Or so I can't admit that to him. But looking back, like that struck me like, he's right, like, and it was someone who I knew and trusted, who knew me and knew my best intentions, right? Not just that voice saying, "You should do this," right? But it was someone I trusted, and so, again, the example of Father Adam mirroring that, right? Or a direct voice, someone telling, "You should do this." Right? Our parents have our best intentions, but it's that natural relationship between parent and kid that was like, "No, do I really want to listen?" But the importance of cultivating those voices of people that you trust their insights, that aren't those normal voices, and that's the real challenge of discernment, right? Because there are voices out there that'll tell you to do everything.
Absolutely.
But it's peering through those and finding those holy voices that are God speaking to you.
For sure. I'm sitting here feeling so humbled, number one, because I do remember the Catholic Song Call program very clearly. I do remember the social and how we were able to have a quiet conversation with all the socializing, the music that was going on, but I've not been accused of being a man of few words, so to know that I was able to listen carefully, I can do it. I have 2 ears and 1 set of lips, but absolutely to your point, Matt, we live in such a busy, noisy world, but people ask me, and I've said this before, I think, on the show, what's the most important thing I've done as a priest in the last 25, 26 years? And I think they expect me to say, the number of babies I baptized or the number of holy hours I've led. And those are all wonderful, important things. But above and beyond that, I have concluded that the most important thing I've attempted to do is to learn to listen very deeply and to create a space where people can safely, confidently, and with total trust, share their story and be their most authentic, true selves and articulate things that maybe they haven't yet articulated, out loud to another person, and to have that held and sort of be the bearer and the witness of that story. And as you said, mirror and reflect back to them to help them hear what it is they're saying and what God may be saying in that. So feeling very touched by that, but also thinking of you mentioning the Franciscans, and thinking of the connection with Father Richard Rohr, Franciscan, who does so much writing and theologizing, I can't even say the word, doing his work of theology, right? So he wrote a book called Everything Belongs, and I've talked about that probably before, but it's just this idea that, everything in our life has its place from God's perspective, even those twists and turns and roadblocks and detours and cars that didn't start like mine this morning in the cold, well, it led me to somewhere to find transportation. But it's that idea that God can and will use everything in our journey to invite us to take that next step and kind of direct us towards God's greater glory and finding our fulfillment and seeking God's glory by becoming fully alive and actualizing ourselves. So with all of that, the next question in my mind is kind of an outflow of what we've been talking about. You just mentioned mechanical engineering. You mentioned quitting before you started, so to speak, to use that terminology. I mean, literally having the offer, getting ready to start, and then being called in a different direction. But fascinating to think about your background in studying mechanical engineering. Like, how did that equip you for what you're doing now?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it's funny, there's some days when it's like, I have an engineering degree, especially in youth ministry, like there's some days like, I have an engineering degree, and this child is complaining about the selection of crayons we have, right, for our program. Like, those are the hard days. But there are really some genuine usages of that. So, as I got into ministry, and I started my master's degree in theology and working on my doctorate, and one of the things in theology that I really liked is systematic theology, of just kind of tracing something in our church, right? Doctrinal development, sacramental development. And I link that to engineering, right? I always say engineering school, it doesn't teach you all the equations, right? It teaches you how to think critically and to take a problem and develop a response to that. And something with theology, which is very deeply connected to our emotions, which is very deeply connected to spirituality, which is the core of theology. But sometimes you can just say, oh, that's a problem, and we're not going to look at a systematic way of addressing it. And so for many ministry challenges, we're all the young people. Well, then I can sit down and actually, let's develop a chart and what's a plan of attack for that, right? And so that's something that I feel engineering prepared me for, and that, again, God used without my knowing it to bring into ministry. But I love that phrase, everything belongs, right? That was actually a line when I was at my parish. The pastoral minister and I would always just, when something was happening, it was out of our control, like, it all belongs.
Everything belongs.
And I think that's so important for understanding vocation, that, and it's something that I really harp on in the book, that as long as you're not doing something that's intrinsically wrong, as long as you're open to God, whether you're a construction worker, a grade school teacher, working in food service, right? No, it doesn't matter. You don't have to be working in ministry as we have chosen, but as long as you're open to God in that moment, that's doing the will of God. It's not saying, did I find that exact path that God was hiding and kind of find the map to get where the job God wanted me to have? That's not vocational discernment. Like the fundamental vocation is receiving the grace God has given and returning that grace through our love, right, and through our expression of faith. And we can do that regardless of our job. And when I kind of came to that realization, like, it took the pressure off, and especially working with younger people, that like, I got to pick the right college, I got to pick the right degree. And those are important, right? There are consequences to changing our degrees. I fully understand that. But the eternal pressure from God, like God is not putting that on us, because God wants to speak to us where we're at. And at the same time, though, God knows us better than we know ourselves. And so God knows what will make us truly happy, and God wants to lead us down that journey, but it's not a lead of like, I'm poking you and saying, if you don't do this, I'm going to be upset with you. Right? God's not going to be disappointed with us if I choose the wrong job. Rather, God's asking, are you responding to my grace where you're at right now? And if you do that and continue to say yes, I will take you on an amazing ride. And that's something that has been revealed to me through ministry. One yes begets 1,000 other yeses after that.
Isn't that the truth?
But it's wherever we're at, God's already reaching out to us and not saying you have to fix yourself first and then we'll talk.
That's so true. And I'm thinking, we've talked on the show too about the 1,000 yeses we say, but also the things we say no to in order to facilitate our yes to this person, to this project, to this relationship, to this congregation. Sometimes I mean, no is a negative word, right? It denotes negation, but it's that holy discernment of knowing that in choosing to say yes to this, it means saying no to other, as you said at the very beginning, Sister Lavina, discerning among goods, things that are not clearly cut good or bad for us, but equally good and equally potential of leading us to holiness.
But I think also it's very easy for us to say now. It seems like I would have to say that, with this book, even though it doesn't end here, there's 1,000 yeses to walk through. I think I may have mentioned this over the years several times, is that just because you said yes at that critical moment, and you've chosen this huge thing that's bigger than us, and now we kind of can see our path. It doesn't mean, I have arrived and that's it.
Exactly, and that's the pitfall. If we look at discernment as like a means to an end, and that end is that job, we were shortchanging, right? But when we look at discernment as kind of like a grander idea, right? It's an ongoing means of grace, right? What does it mean to be discerning right in my job that I'm happy with, right, and want to continue with? But what does it mean to discern how did God get me here? What is God doing with me now? And where is God stretching me in my current, right? If we can really make discernment part of our spirituality, then we're more attuned to God's voice in the everyday. And if we're more attuned to God's voice in the everyday, that is just an abundance of grace that's present, that is there for our opportunity to embrace.
The other thing too, the hardest part I think is from here to here, here to here. And so I think that first step, and I know another thing that I guess I have heard from many people is, how do you even get to the yes? Because to me, my favorite image of that yes is anyone who has seen the third movie of Indiana Jones, which is that scene where he needs to cross from this side of the chasm into the next to get the Holy Grail.
Okay.
Do you remember? Have you seen Indiana Jones?
I'm a film buff, so I'm like on the edge of my seat here. Like, tell me more.
and you have to have faith and the trust that God will get you there. So when he followed this book that says you have to have faith to step into it, and so he just said, okay, I have that faith, and he stepped. He didn't fall because there's actually a bridge there. And there's an illusion that there's nothing because of the way the bridge is placed, the rock was placed so that it looks like there's no bridge in there, but there is. And so even though it feels like we're stepping into the chasm, God is there to catch us. And once you have said that yes with that trust, all the 1,000 yeses somehow will happen. And the first time that I became a lay missionary volunteer for the Redemptorists, I think that was my biggest yes at that time. So that was even BC, before convent, that I said yes to becoming a Franciscan sister of the Sacred Heart. Is from then on, I knew that it takes a lot of that energy to say yes and that faith. But once you do it, somehow you know that God will catch you. Another way to phrase it is that God will not give you, whether it is suffering or something that causes you pain or confusion or anger or whatever, because if you believe that there's that grace, then it is there for you. It's been there all along. But, so just to clarify it to our discerners out there, it is hard, but you're not alone. That's why we need so much of these companions and these voices that would say, and probably it's a skill that you start growing into, is discerning between goods, as the Ignatian way, which is pretty logistical and easy to get into. But first of all, like that prayer, being open to God, to the Holy Spirit, that sometimes it's like, we don't know what's happening here. And somehow the discernment is not a singular path or a lonely path, because being with people who have been there, it helps.
Absolutely.
I can tell you two things I'm going to do when I go home today. Not only am I pick up a copy of the book, but I'm going to revisit Indiana Jones as the film buff that I am. See, spirituality and spiritual messages can be communicated through all means, right? Everything belongs, even through film. So thank you for reminding us of that, Sister Lavina. I really am going to rewatch it because I saw it streaming the other day. So thinking about grace upon grace and progressing your story, so that initial yes to the Catholics on Call program, you had already said yes to ministry in the Diocese of Gary, in parish youth and young adult ministry, and then it seems that more yeses were called forth from you as you deepened your relationship, and you mentioned your further studies at Catholic Theological Union, class of 1982, Pope Leo, right? Okay, so you and I believe, got the same degree.
Yes.
From CTU. Interesting. I'm a Catholic priest, you're a married layman in the church, and we both have a Master's of Divinity degree. So would you like to share with us a little bit about how did that come about in terms of getting into the Master of Divinity studies and the doctoral studies you're doing now as well?
So I started working right at the parish level, and again, my bachelor's degree was in mechanical engineering, and so my pastor's like, we're going to send you for studies. And Father Mike Zarufka, who Franciscan friar, also a graduate of CTU, said, you're going to go to my school. So that's how that worked. And so originally it started off with the master's degree in pastoral studies, which is not as intensive as an MDiv, and so that was the plan. That's a lot of full-time ministers will go in and study, and I just fell in love with studying theology, and not that this is commercial for CTU, but in particular there,
can be.
fell in love with just the diversity of the student body, right? Here we're studying with students from literally all across the world. And so maybe the struggles or the issues within the church that I've seen from my perspective, I realized aren't the same, right? Who would have thought what's happening here in my backyard isn't the same as across the world. And so I really began to fall in love with this idea of this missional approach that CTU is a missionary school. We say, right, it's meant for people to go out and animate, right, not bring Christ, because God's already there, but to animate, right, ministry and theology. And so just really enjoyed my studies. And so as I was wrapping up my pastoral studies degree, I'm like, oh, it's a few more classes to get the MDiv, right? And I finished that up, and I'm like, well, you know what? It's either now or never for a doctorate. So let's do that. Of course, I have
another yes.
Yes, and I have a young daughter at home, a little 7-month-old at home, 7-week-old.
Yes.
Gosh, there goes the lack of sleep. And so I'm like, well, as she gets older, studying will be harder. So let's just keep going for this doctorate. So I'm getting really good at holding a rocking baby in one arm and holding my book in the other arm to read at night. So
and there you are on the screen with your lovely wife, Carissa, whom I've gotten to know. And I had the immense privilege not only of listening to you that fateful night in 2019 when you shared your story, and I was so privileged to hear it, but I also had the privilege of joining you in celebrating your marriage to Carissa in September of 2023, and now at 7 weeks being a father. And so would love to know how you met your wife. And
some great advice from a friend of mine. It was just a little off comment one day, and I've sat with it, is that if you're discerning marriage and right in that relationship, you'll find the person doing something you love. And that's really the story of Chris and I. We were both volunteering at a retreat. It was it was one of those retreats where once you go through it, then you're kind of in the network, and then you go around and help different people do those retreats. And so it was for college students. We just both graduated college, and we just met on the retreat, and we joke our story is just kind of boring because we'll work into the retreat, and she made the first move. She'll go on record as saying she made the first move, and it was a long distance. It was like a 2.5 hours. We lived apart, so it was a little bit of a long distance relationship, and so we were very just intentional from the get-go of, do we want to make this work? And what was really the unifying part of it was our faith, right? We came from the same spot. She was from the beginning always supportive of my work. Being a youth minister, it's a lot of evenings, a lot of weekends. It's changed now a little bit with this, but there's still nights when I'm at a parish, we're working with a parish council or whatnot. But she's always been supportive of my call, right? And so. Again, we say it's a boring relationship because it's just we're gonna make this work and we're gonna do it, and it's been a beautiful relationship. We've gone all over, right? You saw a picture from Rome there, so like we've gotten to travel, and especially in youth ministry, right? I was able to enfold her into that, right? And so she was always my go-to chaperone, right? My female chaperone for things, and even now trying to whenever I present at a parish, do a talk at a parish, she's always there. Now with baby, we'll see how that goes. But right, she's always there, and so it's just a beautiful to tie it back to vocation of how partners can support each other in their vocations, right? And so she has what we call the boring job, right? She is the secular job, but how I'm supporting her and in her role and helping walk her through maybe struggle she's having with her work with people, and so how do I support her to make her the best at her position? How is she feeding into my role as a minister? Again, it's the ongoing support of vocation.
For sure.
That's so important.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And I'm just recalling the joy of being there at the wedding. And I remember very clearly there was a gap of time between the wedding in Northwest Indiana and the reception that evening. And fun fact for you, true story, I had always heard about the shrine of the Christ Passion in St. John's, Indiana.
Yes,
so a commercial
yes,
shout
yes.
out for that. Why not? As Lent is approaching, if you've never been, go.
Yes,
You will
definitely.
not regret it. I spent part of that afternoon because I live in Hyde Park and wasn't prepared to travel far home and then come back to Northwest Indiana again. So I made an afternoon out of my first ever visit there. And so just an amazing opportunity to spend that whole day immersed with celebrating your call to faith and then praying for you and Carissa there before going to share the joy of the reception with you and your families. And now to think that you've had some 7 weeks to get used to being a father, but kind of like, what's the early report? What's the greatest part, aside from the lack of sleep or irregular sleep, but what so far is like the greatest part of being a dad? I will never know what you are experiencing, right? I try to be a spiritual father in many ways, but that physical fatherhood to bring a life into the world and now to nurture, as you say, to carry that life. What are you experiencing right now in real time?
And every cliche about parenthood is true, and you learn in the first 6 weeks. I think the best advice I got, I was teaching a class with USML, and one of my students who's much older than me, but said, the nights are long, but the years are short. And that is so true. Every night it's like you're holding her and it's hard to get her to sleep and she's up and crying. And it's like, when will this be over? But then in the morning when she's adorable and she's just kind of resting on you and says that peaceful look on her face, it's like it is so worth it. And one of the things that's been just so enlightening is the trust she has in me and my wife Carissa, right? And just the sheer trust that she has to have, but has. And it's like, what if I was like that with God, right? What if I just had the ounce of trust my daughter has for survival on me? What if I had that ounce of trust of faith in God? And so there's just been, so many nights of just kind of holding her and just praying with her, and it changes your prayer life. That's something I already learned, right? But that something I've been challenged is, how is rocking crying baby to sleep a prayer? Right, that's living out my vocation.
Indeed.
And so that's a prayer, right? I can't have maybe as long of a holy hour as I used to. I can't just go to the nearby church and pray in the chapel because little life here I got to take care of. But how is that a form of prayer, rocking the baby? And so it changes, right? And something else on the discernment journey too, because again, really discerning the priesthood, and something I've come to the conclusion, it's not like a regret, right? That the joy that you two have and the joy that I have, they're very different joys, but they're all a joy because it's all living out our vocation to the fullest. And so it's that discernment of goods, right? Good and good. When I step away from that and realize that any path, if I'm open to God, will take me beyond where I could imagine, will be an ongoing source of grace upon grace. It takes that competing nature, right? And it makes it exciting and saying, God, you know what? I'm gonna venture out there and trusting I'm following you, and even if I am on the wrong path, whatever that may be, I don't think there is a wrong path, but as long as I'm walking a path with you, God, like, it's going to be a fun ride. It can be challenging, right?
For sure.
And again, a newborn is a perfect example. Like, every night is like rough. I'm up till usually 3 a.m. with her, right? And then pass her off to mom. But but
thank goodness we didn't have you too early this morning. We went easy on you today.
Yes, I'll be eating my coffee after this.
For sure.
But that, any of those moments can just be open to God's love. So whether you're discerning the religious life, whether you're discerning marriage, right? There's not a wrong choice if you are open to God.
And Sister Lavina will appreciate my using this word because this is a word we've been using a lot lately, and I think you mentioned it earlier, but this idea of generativity. You know, how is our calling and our yes animating and generating life in those around us, whether it's physically being a father or in that spiritual listening and mentoring and accompanying and mirroring back to people, and thinking about the fact that the whole reason we brought you here today was to talk about another baby of yours, that the generativity and the fruit of your journey is giving birth, you and your wife, to your daughter, but also to this book, which is now a gift for all of us to receive, The Path of Discernment, Hearing God's Call. So I'd love to hear how, in the midst of everything else that's been going on in your life, with work and ministry, being a father and a husband and all the other things, how did the book come about?
Yeah, so it's really been a labor of love for many. It started in that context of youth ministry, but then more so in the context of my life. And started with the trouble of, like, here's my situation, I'm starting all these paths, and there weren't a lot of good resources. Like, we have a lot of great resources for discerning the priesthood, discerning religious life. There are lots of retreats to go on. And outside of Catholics on Call, there's not a retreat to, like, should I go work in parish ministry, right? Or there's not really a retreat of which engineering firm should I go with, right? There aren't resources for these. And so I really wanted to develop something that's in response to that. And a book that I could hand to any of my friends, right? I grew up with friends who went to Catholic school and just at various points in their life, right? Maybe not as deep in their faith, some still regularly practicing, some certainly open to the concept of God, but wouldn't consider them a every week churchgoer. And so what's something I could give them that opens them up to say, where is God calling you? And so I think even in the introduction I mentioned, like, this book isn't meant to make you a priest or a religious sister or a religious brother, but it's meant to make you more aware. And something I hear in priest vocation circles quite a bit is that it's not so much we have a priest shortage, we do, but it's more the bigger crisis is we have a happy Catholic marriage crisis, right? Less people, and proportionally less people are getting married in the church, less people are raising their kids in the faith, and that trickles to vocations to religious life and the priesthood. And so I take a look at it, if we could just have more happy Catholics that are confident in what they're doing and can bring their faith into what they're doing, that's what we need, just as much as we need more priests and sisters. Like, we need that, absolutely. But I need my lawyers, I need my doctors, I need my construction workers, right, that are really solid in their faith and that can see that even if my job is not explicitly religious, that I'm bringing Christ, right? And we talk, especially if you look at Vatican II, it's bringing Christ. It talks about the privilege of the laity vocation, that you can bring Christ to areas that we who work in the church, even myself, a layperson who work in the church, I'm surrounded by Catholics majority of the day, right? I have to do my evangelization in the evening hours, right, in my free time. But when you're, 9 to 5 is in a secular environment, that is a beautiful opportunity to be an evangelist. And so if people can see all of those realities, that no matter what my vocation is, what my job is, what my career is, if I'm open to God and saying God can use this, that's what really drove the book and why it's, I think, a great resource for anyone. Even if you're in your job and you've been doing your same job for 30 years, we can always be more aware of how God can break into that reality.
I think one of the important things with having that skill individually which is never as an activity for, like solo or individual, because along with the individual discernment that is with accompaniment, there is also a group discernment. So I'm sure that you and Carissa would have had moments of discernment together now as a family, now that you have children. But at the same time, and you will directly relate to this, as director on a vicariate level, you work with parishes, and you know what's going on right now. We're closing parishes, we're closing schools. So in a direct relationship to that, for each parish and those clusters of parishes that either join together or you have to go through a lot of discernment, because without that path of discernment journey, you can't really come together as the body of Christ. And so, I mean, Jesus was the master discerner, and he had to teach that skill over to his disciples. And now in the 21st century, in 2026, we have gotten that into ourselves in our midst, how to discern as a group in our world today that is hurting. We need a lot of that skill.
Absolutely, and one of my other roles here at the Archdiocese is to work with our synod on synodality implementation.
Correct.
And it's a little regret, like the book was kind of wrapping up as I was getting involved and as the synod was really unfolding, so that would be like an appendix I would add. It's probably the next book is going to be.
I'll give you 2 years.
Yeah, we'll get working on that.
For part 2.
Yes, but that's the church's awareness that, and it's my take on all this, that we hear God better when we're all at the table, and it's not just all on Matt. And when there's that isolation, that's a lot of pressure on leaders, and that's the will of God is on you, right? But especially the documents in the synod, right? Especially talking about the role of the bishop, right? That yes, the role of the bishop is intact, certainly, but that the bishop lives out his role better when he's in conversation and dialogue. It's still through his authority, rightful authority in the hierarchy of the church, but that he exercises that more fully when it's in dialogue and listening to the people. And so, the synod on synodality, which I could give a whole, I do presentations and lectures on that, but the little punchline is that it's this idea that, we listen to the Holy Spirit. Holy Spirit's already active in our lives, and we still got to sort truth and false, right? There's still right and wrong, but the Holy Spirit's active in our experiences, and so when we get together and we see that, we can have a better, more full picture of how God's working, not just in my life, but in the life of the church as well.
Wow. Amazing to hear you share all of that, and to think about how we saw a picture of you on the screen with your wife Carissa in Rome, being part of the synod, and especially the chance you had to be part of the Jubilee of Synod Leaders in 2025, and also a previous trip to Portugal for Religious Day in 2023, and now being a father and a husband and a student of life and an engineer and a theologian and an author and all the other things.
And a playwright.
A playwright as well.
A musical.
Yes.
So you're into music too.
Yes.
That is
my
a whole
goodness.
story in
There's
itself.
got to be a story there. So before we get to that question about the musical, which I definitely want to get to, I would just say that we've kind of unpacked the book in terms of the conversation, but would there be like anything, even like after you finish the book, maybe there's like one more thing you would have wanted to include, or like a best next step that someone watching this program today who's thinking about getting the book and will get the book very soon and unpack it, but like what could someone do right now in real time to say like, I can't do everything all at once, but what's one thing I could do right now to take that next step that I feel God might be nudging me to think about this, a life of service, whether it's a layperson, a consecrated religious, a priest, a sister, deacon, what have you, but just that nudge is there. What am I called to do with my life? How can I share my gifts? What would be something they could do?
And I think it's going to loop back to kind of what we were talking about at the very beginning, and I think that's fundamental. That's why it's pretty early in the book, but telling your story. If you have these nudges, they're coming from a lived experience. And so find a trusted voice, a trusted friend, and just sit down and say, if I have this nudge, where is it coming from? And odds are, if you do actually sit back in prayer and look back, it's going to be like, oh, it's because of all these experiences that have given me life, that I have felt the closest to God when I'm in doing something in this vein. And so is that God preparing me for this? in our world, we are so go, go, go. I'm a phone addict as well, so I'm constantly doing my doom scrolling and saying what's new in the world, what's happening. I want to be the first to, and so when you can step back and tell your story in an authentic way, the good and the bad, right? Not holding on to the traumatic, but when I look at maybe the rough parts in my life, when I look at the joyous parts, when I was most happy, when those moments when I know God was tangibly present in my life, what was happening. That is such an amazing first step, and so I would really encourage anyone, tell your story. I think I literally did that here, right?
You sure did. And I'm so privileged that you took the liberty of sharing your story with me back in 2019, and so grateful to be able to have you together with me and Sister Lavina today to tell more of your story to more of the world, because what you're really doing in telling your story is encouraging us to tell our stories and to find those individuals that sometimes we'll be the ones sharing, sometimes we're the ones listening. It's a very mutual process. We all experience that together in community.
The other thing that I think is important that you pointed out, and so this is a plug for CTU and Catholics on Call and other programs like that. And I will be remiss if I didn't mention that when we were conversing earlier, I mentioned Sister Belinda Monahan. I mentioned, Shield Catholic Center, but it's actually, their whole team. Father Bradley, who's the chaplain for Shield, for Tim Higgins, who's really my contact. I will be participating in a week-long busy student retreat. You said busy, scrolling on the phone, maybe midterms for college students. Where would you find time? But even if you did have time, if there's no opportunity, then sometimes it's hard. It's even harder to find that time. So I think, in a way, an invitation and a challenge, and really inspiration for religious like us, or institutions, organizations, is to provide that fertile land, safe space for people to be heard, to tell their stories, and for us to be able to listen in. And not to dictate, or, we can always invite, but I think the invitation is already there. I think the mirroring and the accompaniment is very important.
That's amazing to hear you say that, Sister Lavina. If you only knew what's on the docket for me tonight at 8 o'clock. Like literally tonight, we'll be gathering on Zoom for our monthly online discernment group for my Divine Word community.
Yes.
And it's not called like BNSVD, it's called Discerning the Call to Mission. I don't know how the men are called to mission. Are they called to mission as an author, as a father, as a husband, as a priest or deacon or lay ecclesial minister? But what we'll do is try to gather the men to be in conversation with one another. And tonight we're doing what's called an open forum, where, to your point exactly, it's what would you like to know? What questions do you have? So trying to create those spaces. We can do this. Does it take time? Yes. Does it take commitment and planning? Of course. But to create those spaces which are diminishing in our world, to invite people into that circle. So we kind of gave a tease for it, and we'd be remiss if we didn't get there, but I'm a film buff, but I like musicals too. I know that you have your hand into having composed a musical entitled The Bluff.
Yes.
We got to know.
Yes.
What is that all about? Please tell us.
And I think this might tie everything together. And so I'll again, be very short, because it's 10 years in the making. But so again, my childhood friend Scott, context, we were both homeschooled growing up, and there's this homeschool theater group. So we did some high school theater together, and it was in the midst of this, and I said, and these were just plays. I'm like, we should do a musical. Like, we should write a musical. My friend Scott is just a phenomenal piano player. He's a full-time engineer, but on his weekends he's playing at Sunday Mass, at different churches in Northwest Indiana. And so I said, we should write a musical. So Scott, you do the music. I'll write the script and the story of it. And so wrote the first draft in like 3 days. It was, when it's high school, you can do a lot more. But then it just became this workshopping thing, or just for fun. Like, this was our outlet. We both knew we were going to study engineering once we graduated high school, but this is just our fun little outlet. Then and then another childhood friend a couple years later comes into the process. Now Father Stephen comes into the process, and he has a theater background, and our friend George, who did the tech side of things. So it just became the four of us, this little project. We all, through college, they went to different universities, but when they were on break, we would write this together. And then throughout the process of all this, my friend Father Stephen discerned the priesthood, and so he went off to seminary. And it was his last semester before he graduated, and they're reviving the theater program up at Sacred Heart Seminary in Detroit. And he's like, guys, I think we can put the musical on here. And so we really rushed to get it together, and we put it on. And so we had our grand premiere at Sacred Heart Seminary, and that there's an image of it there. And then so that one there was a high school theater director who was at the show, and he's like, can we put it on at my high school? So that's the second showing of it there, done by middle school and high schoolers, which was so adorable. And then we had so it's this idea that none of us do this for a full time. My friend Scott is again a mechanical engineer. He stayed on that path that we were on together. My friend George is a computer engineer. Father Stephen is a priest, and here I am, a lay minister. And we all have this passion. And so it's this idea that God doesn't make you surrender your passions. And that's a myth I talk about in the book, that following God's will means I just don't get up every morning and pray and go through the motions and really be dead to who I am. We talk about death to self and rising again. That's important, but it's rising with a fullness of life that God offers us. And so here's this passion that all four of us had that we can never do in our day jobs. I don't know if we're good enough to do it full time. Listen to the show if you want. But
what's the plot?
The plot. So it's a murder mystery musical comedy. Throwing a lot in there, just a feel good time, some really good music, and so. And again, it's this idea that God uses our talents. And so here we are doing our jobs and coming together and still doing something beautiful, because the arts are beautiful in a way. And so we've been making a run through the Catholic high school theater group, right? And so it was great, talking to the students as they're putting it on about following your dreams and your passion. So again, God will use our talents in ways we could never imagine. Absolutely. And if we say yes and are open to ongoing yeses, don't be surprised what God will do in your life.
Amen. And if people aren't convinced yet, all they have to do is go to mattkresich.com, because this gentleman here, who you've been inspired by, and I know you have too, Sister Lorena, for the last hour, is available to lead retreats, to speak, even to do, I understand, parish missions. So we hope and encourage that people will visit the website, check out what you have available, check out the book, The Path of Discernment, Hearing God's Call. Check out The Bluff for the lighter side of things. Matt, it's been such a privilege to have you with us today. Thank you so much. I hope that our viewers and listeners have found this as inspiring, as enriching it has been, I know, for Sister Lavina and myself. So we want to wish you many, many, many abundant blessings in your continued service to the people of God in Vicariate 6 of the Archdiocese, but also your service and witness to us as the committed father and husband that you are. Many blessings to you and your family. And we hope to have you back when that second book is coming out.
Yes.
Right? Okay, part 2.
Yeah.
So thank you again for being with us today. So as we
Thank
begin
you,
to wrap
Matt.
things up, we certainly want to thank everyone for tuning in today. Wish you a wonderful month of February. Even though we're still in the midst of this cold season, we are heading, as we said, to the Lenten season. So maybe a time for God to animate and renew within us that call to make God the center of our lives. And please do pick up a copy of the book, The Path of Discernment, Hearing God's Call by Matt Kresich. Thank you, Sister Lavina.
Thank you, Father Adam.
Thank you, Matt, for being with us today. And we wish everyone many blessings. Have a great day, and we'll
God
see
bless.
you next month on the Dare to Love Show.
Journey will bring, and you guide me faithfully to find a home in